Hello and welcome back to Shakesyear. We are going to cover all of Act 4 today in Merry Devil of Edmonton. We're going to hear from Sexton Salomon in Act 4, Scene 2, but first we have to cover Act 4, Scene 1. And just real quick, what happened in Act 3 is that the younger generation of boys, that being Henry and Frank and Raymond, figured out a way that they were going to get Millicent out of the nunnery. They're going to meet by the willow tree and everybody will be able to escape. Meanwhile, Raymond is disguised as a friar, as is Peter Fable. If you remember, though, about the woods, about Brian's Wood, way back in Act 2, Scene 1, we got to meet the clowns who were stealing deer from Brian's Wood. And Act 4, Scene 1 starts with the clowns again. We have Host Blake, we have Smug, we have Banks, we have the priest Sir John, and they're in Brian's Wood, and they're giving each other a bunch of garbage about how drunk they all are. They talk a little trash at each other, but they're getting ready to steal a deer. But they agree that if they are discovered in the woods by Brian, they'll run and hide on the church porch at Enfield, and then they all leave the stage. Henry Clare, Frank Yerningham, and Millicent enter, also in the woods. They are escaping. So we have these guys hunting and we have these guys escaping, and they sort of almost cross paths in the woods, but these guys come and they go off this way, and these guys come in and they've just broken Millicent out and they're fleeing. They got her out successfully, and they're, how are you doing? And she's like, I'm doing great. I'm so glad to be away from there. But then they hear horsemen, so they hide in the bushes. Millicent jumps into one bush and Henry Clare and Frank jump into another bush. But it's not Brian that they've heard, and it's not their parents that they've heard or anything. It's the clowns again. And so all of the clowns come back in, and Smug says that he has killed this deer that's the biggest deer that's ever been killed, so they should all head back to Enfield. So they leave, but then Brian and his serving man Ralph enter. So it is Brian's Wood. It's his deer that was just killed. They come in and Brian's like, somebody's out here stealing my deer. And they find Millicent in the bushes and she's like, please don't shoot me. And Brian's like, wait a second, Millicent? Because if you remember, Raymond was going to tell Brian that they were coming. Brian is in on the plot to get Millicent out of there. His place is sort of their rendezvous point once they've gotten her away. So Brian is like, Millicent? I was looking for you at my lodge like an hour ago. And she's like, well, we got a little lost, but I promise Henry and Frank are here. And the two of them come out of the bushes and there's a little back and forth, and Henry and Frank are like, the deer stealers went that away. But then all of them hear Arthur Clare and Sir Ralph Yerningham, who's the older Yerningham, coming. So everybody leaves so that they won't be caught, except for Brian, who stays behind and accuses Arthur and Ralph of being the ones that are stealing his deer. And Ralph is like, no, you stole my daughter. And they both promise, they're like, I'm going to tell the king on you. No, I'm going to tell the king on you. And blah, 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 and yada, yada. And that's the end of Act 4, Scene 1. So Act 4, Scene 1 is, to me, very farcical and very physical, with the different groups coming through the woods and trying to avoid these groups and trying to avoid those groups. And then I just love it that at the end of that scene, Brian's like, you stole my deer, to these two men who had nothing to do with any of it. So anyway, that's Act 4, Scene 1. Act 4, Scene 2, Banks has made it to the church at Enfield, and he gets on the porch and he's like, oh, I might as well rest here while I wait for everybody else to show up. So he lies down on the porch of the church, and Sexton Salomon enters and says, here's a sky black as Lucifer. God bless us. Here was Goodman Theophilus buried. He was the best nutcracker that ever dwelt in Enfield. Well, 'tis 9 o'clock, 'tis time to ring curfew. Lord bless us, what a white thing is that in the church porch. Oh, Lord, my legs are too weak for my body, my hair is too stiff for my nightcap, my heart fails. This is the ghost of Theophilus. Oh, Lord, it follows me. I cannot say my prayers, and one would give me £1,000. Good Spirit, I have bowled and drunk and followed the hounds with you 1,000 times, though I have not the spirit now to deal with you. Oh, Lord. So, again, another farcical, comical moment. The sexton sees Banks asleep on the porch of the church and thinks he's a ghost of a dear departed friend named Theophilus. So he comes in and he's like, well, it's time for me to ring the church bell, ringing the curfew. But then he sees him sleeping there and he's like, oh my goodness, I'm being haunted. And he starts to freak out. Priest Sir John enters at that moment, and the sexton is like, look, I saw a ghost over there. And Priest Sir John is like, well, I just saw 15 ghosts in the forest. And the two of them freak out and they leave, and Banks wakes up and he's like, wait, what's going on? And then host Blake enters and chats with Banks, because they're both sort of like, okay, you made it, how are we doing here? And they convince themselves that Smug must have been arrested. Banks leaves to go see if that's the case. Host Blake is like, wait, what is that white thing in the churchyard? And the priest Sir John and Sexton Salomon come back in raving that they've seen a ghost in the churchyard. And there's this weird sort of little call out where Sir John is like, yeah, it was the ghost of a man's body. And the sexton is like, well, it could have been a woman's body, which just amused me from the gender specificity at that moment. It felt very, very modern as opposed to very, very old. But anyway, the three of them get so spooked by the fact that there's potentially a ghost wandering around the graveyard that they're like, okay, host Blake is like, I'm never stealing a deer again. Let's all go back to my house because it's going to be safe again. I'm never stealing a deer from Brian's Wood again. And the three of them leave. And that's the end of Act 4, Scene 2, which is also the end of Act 4. So Act 4 is very comical, very farcical, very visual. We've got ghosts, we've got people hiding from each other, but the important plot point, Millicent has been broken out of the prison, or has been broken out of the nunnery. Prison, depending on how you look at it. She was considering it to be one. So anyway, she is now out. Everybody else is afraid of ghosts and spirits. But remember, somebody said that he was going to unleash some ghosts and spirits? Yeah, well, we'll see how it all gets resolved as we dig into Act 5 starting tomorrow. So I'll see you then. Mwah.